Some stories, even though they're ancient, just feel like they were written yesterday. We're about to dive into one of those, the Book of Ruth. It's a short story, but wow, it is packed with loss, loyalty, and redemption that are just as powerful today as they were thousands of years ago.
So think about this for a second. How does a story that kicks off with absolute tragedy, we're talking famine, death, displacement, somehow become one of the most beautiful stories about hope and love ever told? Well, that's the big question we're going to unpack here. And the answer, it turns out, is all about the incredible choices made by some very ordinary people.
All right, let's set the stage. Our story begins in a really tough time in ancient Israel. A terrible famine has its grip on the land, and it's so bad that a family from Bethlehem has to make an impossible choice. Do we stay here and starve, or do we pack up and become immigrants in Moab, a neighboring land that, let's just say, wasn't always friendly?
What was supposed to be a temporary move turns into a decade of heartbreak. Things just go from bad to worse, and fast. First, Naomi's husband dies. Then, her 2 sons, who had married local women, they die too. So in the span of about 10 years, Naomi is left a widow, she has no children, and she's basically an aging foreigner in a foreign land with just her 2 daughters-in-law.
Eventually, Naomi hears the famine back home is over, so she decides to go back. But she is just a shell of her former self. She's so broken that she tells people, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant. She says, "Call me Mara," which means bitter. Her own words just capture this feeling of total emptiness. "I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty." Can you imagine? She left with a family, and now she's returning with absolutely nothing.
And this brings us to a real fork in the road. Naomi, in her grief, actually tells her daughters-in-law Orpah and Ruth, look, go back to your own families. You're young, you can get married again, you can have a future. There's nothing for you with me. And after a lot of tears, Orpah does. She says goodbye and heads home. But Ruth just won't leave.
And this right here is the moment the whole story pivots. Ruth makes this absolutely incredible vow. Think about what she's doing. She's choosing to leave behind everything and everyone she's ever known, her home, her family, her whole culture, to stick with her broke, grieving mother-in-law. It is this radical act of loyalty and love, and it changes everything that comes next.
So Naomi and Ruth show up in Bethlehem with, well, literally nothing. They are total outsiders. But there's this little glimmer of hope, their timing. They arrive right at the beginning of the barley harvest, a season that's all about abundance. So how are they going to eat? They have to rely on this ancient practice called gleaning. Now, this wasn't just digging for scraps. It was actually a pretty cool concept, kind of like a form of social welfare that was built right into the law. Landowners had to leave the edges of their fields for the poor, for widows, for foreigners, the most vulnerable people, so they could gather their own food. For Ruth, this is their only shot at survival.
So Ruth heads out to glean, and the story says she just happens to end up in a field that belongs to this guy named Boaz. But you get the feeling it's not really a coincidence, right? Because Boaz isn't just some random wealthy guy. He's also a relative of Naomi's late husband. And this so-called chance encounter, well, it's about to change their entire lives.
And Boaz, wow, he notices Ruth right away. And he doesn't just do the bare minimum the law requires. No, he goes way above and beyond. First, he tells his workers to make sure nobody hassles her. He tells her she's safe in his fields. He offers her water, he invites her to eat with them, and he even secretly tells his guys to leave behind extra grain for her to find. This isn't just charity, it's deep, genuine kindness.
So you might be wondering, why is he being so incredibly generous to this total stranger? Well, it turns out her story got there before she did. Boaz tells her straight up, "I've heard all about what you've done for your mother-in-law." Her incredible act of loyalty back on the road for Moab has already made her famous in town, and Boaz is moved by her character.
When Ruth gets home with a ton of grain, Naomi immediately connects the dots. She realizes whose field Ruth was in, and she says, "That man is our kinsman redeemer." Okay, so what in the world is that? A goel, or kinsman redeemer, was a really important role. It was the duty of a close male relative to step in and save a family in crisis, maybe by buying back their land or, and this is key, by marrying a widow to carry on the family name.
And suddenly, Naomi, the woman who wanted to be called bitter, she has a spark back. She sees this opportunity, this tiny glimmer of hope, and she comes up with the plan. And let me tell you, it is a bold, daring, and honestly a super risky plan.
Okay, listen to this plan, because it sounds pretty strange to our modern ears. The instructions are very specific. And for a woman to go alone at night to a place like a threshing floor, well, she was putting her reputation on the line. Big time. But you've got these two women, with everything stacked against them, deciding to take their future into their own hands.
So picture this. It's the middle of the night. Boaz is asleep, and he startles awake to find a woman lying at his feet. I mean, talk about a surprise. But what she says next is so important. When she asks him to take her under his wing, it's not a romantic come-on. It's a brave and formal legal proposal, asking him to step up and be her kinsman redeemer.
And how does Boaz react? This is where you see his true character shine. He's not offended, he's actually impressed. He gets it. He sees this as just another example of her incredible loyalty, her kindness. The first time was her kindness to Naomi. This time, it's kindness to her late husband's family, trying to preserve his legacy. He praises her and promises he'll take care of it.
But there's a plot twist. There's always a plot twist, right? Boaz explains, look, I will absolutely do this, but there's one small problem. There's another guy who is a closer relative than I am, and legally, he gets the first shot at this. So Boaz can't do anything until this other man officially says no.
Boaz is a man of his word. The very next morning, he goes right to the city gate. Now, you have to understand, the gate wasn't just a door to the city. It was the public square. It was the courthouse, city hall, the whole shebang. This is where official business got done, out in the open for everyone to see.
So Boaz finds the other relative and lays out the situation. He says, hey, you have the right to buy Naomi's land. And the guy is immediately interested. Great, I'll take it. But then Boaz adds the fine print. And whoever buys the land also has to marry Ruth, the Moabite woman. And just like that, the other guy backs out. He's only thinking about the money, afraid it might ruin his own inheritance. Boaz, on the other hand, sees the person. He's willing to do the right thing.
And so to make it all official, they do this really interesting thing. The other relative takes off his sandal and gives it to Boaz. It sounds a little weird to us now, but back then, that was like signing a contract in front of a dozen witnesses. It was a public, binding agreement. The deal is done. Boaz is now the official redeemer.
And this is the part of the story where the camera pulls way, way back. What started as this very personal story about one family's tragedy and their kindness to each other is about to zoom out and become a story that's a huge deal for an entire nation.
So Boaz and Ruth get married, and sure enough, they have a son named Obed. And the story just comes beautifully full circle. Naomi, the woman who came back feeling totally empty, is now holding her own grandson. Her life is full again. The women of the town even celebrate with her, saying Ruth has been better to her than 7 sons. It's complete restoration.
But wait, the story doesn't even stop there. And here comes the final stunning reveal. Their son, Obed, grows up and has a son of his own, named Jesse. And Jesse? Well, he has a son you've probably heard of, a young man named David. Yes, that David, King David. Just think about that for a second. Ruth, the foreigner, the outsider, the widow who was picking up leftover grain in a field, becomes the great-grandmother of the most famous king in Israel's history. It's incredible.
And so, a story that starts with just trying to survive ends up teaching us something so profound. It's a reminder that those individual acts of loyalty, those moments of unexpected, over-the-top kindness, they don't just affect our own lives. They can create ripples that travel through generations, shaping a future that's way bigger and more important than we could ever imagine.